So I want to introduce Crosby Devitt to do his CEO report. I do want to welcome Crosby to his first AGM, as he has been hired from GFO board to become the CEO to replace Barry Senft. I know a lot of you have probably met Crosby in the hallways when we had other meetings, and since he was with GFO since multiple years in the VP role, and certainly has been a good asset then to GFO, and now coming into the CEO role, he brings a lot of experience to the organization with what he has been doing in the past. And so again, I don't want to take too much time out of the agenda, but Crosby, the floor is yours, and welcome to the organization.
Well, thank you, Marcus. Certainly, it's my pleasure to be able to address you today as the incoming CEO since starting in the role officially April 2nd. And certainly, it's been a year of change, and a lot of things have happened. And my role today is to put a little bit more context around the numbers that you just heard, all of the work that GFO staff and board and the organization have been doing over the last year, and going to spend a few minutes covering those. Next slide, please. But I first want to address Marcus mentioned that we had our Barry Senft retired officially beginning of April, and he was obviously a very big part of this organization over the last 10 years. Came in, started as the first and only CEO for the organization for the last 10 years, and made a very significant contribution to the organization. I have been able to keep in close touch with Barry over the last few months since his retirement, and as many of you know, he farms with his family in Saskatchewan, east of Regina, and just talked to him last week, and he's actually harvested 2 wheat crops already since he's been retired. So they had a tough winter and fall, and got a lot of their wheat harvested in April, put the crop in, and then they're hard at harvest right now. So he's certainly been keeping busy, and always continue to be interested in what's happening at GFO. Next slide, please. As you know, the organization is only as good as its people, and we have a lot of great people at this organization, and I just want to acknowledge our board, our staff, and our members for the work that they're doing. We've certainly had lots of things coming our way as an organization and as a society over the last few months, and I just want to recognize the dedication of our staff, especially on that. One of the unique things about being able to have a Zoom meeting, one of the good things is it's easier for people to join, and I know we have a lot of our staff on the call today that normally wouldn't be able to make it to the AGM. So that's a good thing. And I did want to just mention we do have a new staff member that actually just joined the organization. His first day was yesterday. So our new Paul Hoekstra just joined GFO as our new Vice President Strategic Development. So you'll likely see more of Paul through the coming months, either by Zoom or hopefully at some point in person when we can have meetings together. Next slide, please. So I mentioned 2019 was certainly a year of change. We had a lot of things happening before COVID hit, and certainly when things came to a head there in March and everything shut down, we quickly pivoted as an organization. And you can see on the slides there, that's what our office looks like these days. So we mid-March, just like everyone else, transitioned to working at home. As you know, almost all of our staff generally work out of our Guelph office, and mid-March transitioned to working from their home offices. Everybody just picked up, figured out a way to make it work, and we've been carrying on since. Just in the last month or 6 weeks or so, we've been able to transition back to a partial office reopening, which is good, but we still have significant flexibility in terms of work environment, and it looks like that's going to continue for some time. But certainly we've been able to keep everything going and working tirelessly on behalf of our membership. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we celebrated this year was our 10 years of Grain Farmers of Ontario. And we certainly were planning a major celebration at the March Classic that unfortunately couldn't happen, but we found some other ways to celebrate the 10 years of GFO. And if you've been reading the Ontario Grain Farmer magazine, you'll have noticed that in every issue in 2020, we've had a section and an article highlighting 10 years of progress and some of the work that's been done over the last decade on your behalf, and where we've come to get to today. And we'll be continuing that over the coming months. Some other things that we've been able to do is, certainly related to COVID, but early on in the pandemic, there was a significant need for those in need for food, and Feed Ontario, which is the kind of Association of Ontario Food Banks, reached out, and we talked about a partnership, and your board of directors approved a major donation to Feed Ontario towards their food box program. So $100,000 was provided to Feed Ontario to get food to those in need across the province, and we know a lot of other farm organizations contributed as well. But also a lot of the district committees talked about local support, and were able to make some donations to their local food banks and those in need. And so to me, it just shows we're all in a challenging situation, and the generosity and genuineness of farmers to want to help out those in need is real, and it certainly makes this organization an even stronger and more desirable place to be associated with and work together on these issues. So with that, we'll just go to the next slide, and I'm gonna spend a few minutes talking about some of our program areas. And Marcus talked a lot about the progression and the timeline for a lot of our government relations activities related to the business risk management programs. And certainly that's been a major focus and an increase, as you know, in our emphasis on those, and trying to get some meaningful change happening both provincially and federally. There are other government priorities that we've been working on at the same time, and I'll just touch on some of those as well. The next slide talks about competitiveness, and as a key goal for the organization, one of our key goals is to help farmer members continue to be competitive, and that means having good returns and not being burdened by additional taxes or red tape or things like that. And so there's some key areas there. Carbon tax especially was a major focus. We've been communicating at every opportunity with our federal government that carbon taxes on farming and grain farming, especially on the drying side, should be exempt from carbon tax. And so the message has been heard. We've had a couple of stalled efforts, I guess, within government to get that changed, but we are not giving up on that. It's still a major priority. Marcus mentioned U.S. farm aid a couple times in his remarks, and that's certainly something that we're keeping a very close eye on as the billions of dollars roll out to farmers. As we know, if you're in the business, we're in direct competition and in similar markets as our U.S. counterparts, and certainly we need a level playing field, and that's been made known to government and in our proposals. With all the COVID, not necessarily distraction, but fixation, and rightfully so, we can sometimes get lost on some of the other issues. And, the China-US trade war had a significant effect before COVID hit, and that continues. There's turmoil in the markets. Short term, we've seen some changes here, but it's just anybody's guess how long that's going to last or when the next big thing will happen. And so, we're dealing with volatility, and that's a big part of why the BRM safety net is so important. And the ask is not for a handout, it's for a backstop when farmers need it. And Next slide, please. So in terms of working with government, I think Marcus talked about, dozens and dozens of meetings we've had with members of provincial parliament and members of parliament, senators, senior staff within government. But a lot of it is about building relationships and having allies when you need them. And through the course of the year and over the last number of years, GFO has been involved in leading a number of events. Last fall at the International Plowing Match, we once again held our VIP plowing and lunch for members of provincial parliament, and we were able to welcome Premier Ford and Minister Hardeman and many of the other members of provincial parliament to the event. We also partnered federally with our Quebec and our Atlantic counterparts to host a federal reception in February, as well as a provincial reception for our provincial members of parliament as well. Next slide. So we have been making some progress, and provincially, there is something that is quite significant, happened right around the timing of a lot of other media events and the emergence of COVID, but it is a very significant change, and there's been amendments made to the Provincial Pesticide Act and regulations that have addressed a number of the concerns that GFO and others have put forward. Really, what those changes have meant is that now the provincial government recognizes the federal regulators, the Pest Management Regulatory, PMRA, Pest Management Regulatory Agency, as our federal science-based regulator of pesticides, and that they've basically eliminated the duplication of regulations and another layer that was completely a red tape type of thing provincially. And so that's been changed. And as part of that, we've seen a change to the neonic regulations. They're still there, but the changes have reduced the red tape, the need for unnecessary testing of fields and things like that, and farmers can now use their judgment in a science-based way as to whether they need to use the product. And actually we saw that come into place just in time for spring planting, and actually are aware that it's actually helped farmers get access to seed that they needed this past spring. Next slide. So as we look at some of the government work ahead of us, certainly we've been spending a lot of time and many years working on ethanol and biodiesel and the importance of biofuels. We know that corn ethanol is good for the environment, it's good for farmers, it's good for consumers to be able to buy a locally produced renewable product to fuel their cars. And we were very encouraged to see the provincial government indicate their intent to raise the mandate to 15% ethanol. So we're very much looking forward to that. Federally, we have seen a proposed clean fuel standard emerge, and that's been a discussion for a number of years, but has just gotten back onto their priority list over the last few months. And as an organization, we spent significant amount of time and effort, and it's ongoing, addressing some of the serious concerns we have with that. And I know it's going to come up in discussion later on the agenda in new business, but certainly GFO has been spending a significant amount of time and certainly able to elaborate on some of those issues. So as we carry on, next slide, please. Market development is a big priority, not only on the biofuels side of things, but also in a few other areas. And so what we're trying to do in the whole market development area is maintain our current good markets and build new markets, both domestically and export. Next slide. And one of the important things is understanding where the crop goes. Where are those markets? What are they? What's growing? What's not growing? And what are the opportunities? And so this year we just refreshed our new Ontario Grains Market Report, and it basically outlines for each of the 5 crops: corn, soybeans, wheat, barley, and oats. All of the major markets for those crops, where they go, and some change from 3 or 4 years ago when we first did the report. And so if you're interested in that, it's on the website, and we use that in multiple areas now. First of all, it can guide some of our priorities in terms of where we want to focus promoting new markets, but it also is a great communication piece for working with government, but also working with our industry partners and our markets overseas as well that may not have a good familiarity with what we produce here in Ontario. Next slide. So looking domestically, certainly we've got a number of efforts underway, and I mentioned 10 years of progress. We've had the Grains Innovation Fund for the entire 10 years of GFO so far, and over that 10 years have invested just over $1 million. And through that fund, it provides the opportunity to partner directly with food companies or companies that are either processing or using Ontario grains. And often it's a project that they are looking to expand their use of Ontario grain, whether they're expanding a facility or switching to Ontario source from another source. And it's a great opportunity for us to partner with them, develop new products, and actually see a real impact in the market. This past year, we've spent significant amount of time focusing on food sector initiatives. We see a continued demand for local food, and often grains can be a bit overlooked despite the fact that grains are produced across the entire province and on as big an acreage as any crop in this province, of course. So we've been trying to make it easier for food companies to source Ontario grain. And so through that, we've got a sourcing guide for companies on where they can go to purchase processed grain. But also we've started building a dedicated website for the food industry to go to that may not have the same interest in the farm level side of things, but are interested in the grain side from a processing and purchasing side. So that's in development right now. Next slide. I mentioned international markets being of critical importance, and what we've seen as a trend is increased protectionism. We've seen free trade agreements being signed, which is very positive over the last few years. However, with that, we've seen some non-tariff trade barriers emerging that poses a risk to our markets. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do proactively is go out into those markets that are currently buying Ontario grain, but also looking at potential markets that could either buy more or could become a new market, and proactively promote ourselves in those markets and make sure that the barriers that might exist are broken down. And so to do that, we partner in a number of trade missions. So we partner with our organizations we're members of, including Soy Canada, Cereals Canada, as well as we were on a provincial trade mission this past fall. So we were directly promoting Ontario grain in the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Latin America, and other Southeast Asian countries. And so try to cover the globe on those markets that we're actually exporting to and keep those markets open. Next slide, please. And so when we look at sustainability, I think it's a term that's often overused, but we hear it a lot, especially when we're talking internationally. A lot of the buyers and those sourcing grains from different parts of the world have a growing interest in whether the product they're buying has been grown sustainably. And so as an organization, we've done a lot of work over the last few months and years to look at the sustainable production of Ontario grains. And we know, based on the metrics and the experience that we have, that there's no better place in the world than Ontario to source sustainably produced grains. What we're seeing is the increasing need to prove it. And so to that end, we partner with a number of organizations and groups that have systems that allow you to basically prove sustainability. And so on the slide, there's three main ones there that we're directly involved in. Field to Market Canada was just formed with an alliance with our US counterparts. And so there's a number of programs through Field to Market that retailers and grain buyers can use to ensure sustainably sourced grain. For a number of years, we've been involved in the Sustainable Ag platform, the SAI platform, and that's a more European food-based program that allows companies to source sustainable product. And so through the work that we've done, we've got a system in place should a grain buyer wish to get certified or have their grower have their growers that are supplying them with grain go through the program. It's available to them. When we look more on the farm level, the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Program has emerged certainly in the fertilizers side as a key area. And so we're heavily involved in the steering committee there and the rollout of 4R Nutrient Stewardship across Ontario. Next slide. So just keeping moving here, research continues to be a strong area of the organization. Just next slide, please. This is a snapshot of what we've done in the last year. As you know, and for a number of years, research has been a big priority in terms of funding for directly into projects that were of importance to grain farmers. And so this past year, about $1.85 million of your checkoff fees went directly into research projects. And a big part of the work that we do is to try to leverage that and partner with industry and government. And so this year, the team was quite successful in leveraging $3.30 for every $1 that GFO put in. So that brings our impact, we'll call it close to $8 million. So GFO is a major contributor through our partnership and directly to field crop research in this province. And without GFO, I think we would see a totally different picture in terms of the research landscape. I'll just keep moving to the next slide. One of the areas we've seen continue to become more important on the research side is connecting with researchers about our priorities, but also helping to facilitate researchers connecting with each other. We've seen some long-standing researchers that have been in the field crop side retire over the last recent years, and fortunately a number of those positions have been replaced, but often they're going to be replaced with new researchers that are less familiar with our production side. And so we've spent a lot of time including hosting a researcher forum to connect researchers with our priorities so they can hear directly from farmers what they're dealing in the field and how they can help answer some of those key questions as we go. And so we're continuing to build those networks and continue to take on that role as an organization. Next slide. I mentioned that we've welcomed some new researchers, and we're very fortunate to have a couple of new key positions filled. The Maxon Professorship has been filled recently by Dr. Joshua Nazaleski, and so he's the new Northern and Eastern Ontario agronomy researcher with the University of Guelph. And so very fortunate to have him now as a partner and working specifically on areas in Eastern Ontario and Northern Ontario that have different production regions, need different types of research. And so good to see the recognition directly of that need. And we've got a number of projects with Dr. Nazaleski. More recently, we just welcomed Dr. Helen Booker as the new Grain Farmers of Ontario Professorship in Wheat Breeding at the University of Guelph. And Helen comes to Ontario from Western Canada, where she was in leading breeding programs in Saskatchewan. And it's great to see that position filled. Unfortunately, the position was vacant for about a year due to the really unfortunate passing of Dr. Ali Navabi, who made some significant contributions to Ontario wheat while he was a wheat breeder at the University of Guelph. Next slide. I know Murray in his financial report talked about the wheat marketing pools and returns, so I won't repeat there. Just on the next slide shows a summary of this past year. So if we look at the 2019 harvest, we had significantly lower acres and production due to some challenges with getting the crop in the ground and then subsequent winter kill. We had about 660,000 acres of wheat. Prices were decent through the year, and we did see some lower pool participation this past year, and that was reflected in the financial statements as well in terms of payments to producers. So just going to keep going here. Next slide, we'll maybe just carry on to the next one after that. Communications is a big part of the organization, both to our farmer members, but also to the general public. And so number of tools, hopefully you've all seen them. The Ontario Grain Farmer magazine comes out to every farmer in the province, or every grain farmer in the province, I should say. And we publish that 10 times a year. We've got a weekly newsletter that hopefully you all see as well, Grain Talk. Every Friday afternoon, you get weekly updates from the organization. Next slide. Public outreach is a big part of our communications department, and you'll have seen a lot of that come through our Good in Every Grain brand And that's really the consumer-facing work that we do. And so over the past year, we've seen some significant increases in traffic digitally. I think partly we've done some increased and more targeted outreach and promotion of our work, but also I think people being at home more due to COVID, they're looking for more material, and so they've been able to access a lot that GFO has to offer. We've got about some of the stats. The Good Neighbor Grain website traffic was up about 800% this past year, so that's quite significant and good to see as we continue to build that out. Next slide. As we also get out to a lot of events, and before COVID hit, we had a number of events that we were able to get out to, over 30 events across the province, including some of our key ones, the CNE, the Honda Indy, the Royal Winter Fair, for example. But we also try to get involved with ag education, and we've talked about this before, that the classroom is often in need of good information about agriculture and food, and so we were able to get 30,000 seed cups into the hands of grade 3 students through our grade 3 program, where they could actually grow a soybean or a wheat seed and see it grow and follow the curriculum linked lessons along there with their teacher on how farmers grow the same crops in their fields. And we're continuing that this year. Next slide. So just the last thing I'm going to cover here before wrapping up is our member relations, and certainly an extension of communications, but working directly with members to provide opportunities for your involvement in the organization, but also to learn about some of the things that we're facing and also provide direct input to the organization. So certainly our January, next slide, please, our January district meetings that are held across the province is a big part of that. Later in January, we hold our Grains in Action, which is the program to help younger farmers get involved in the organization. And it's gone over very well over the last number of years. And this past year was another sold out event. I think there was over 30 participants from across the province, where they get to go out and see what happens to their grain after they ship it, and whether it's processing into food or grain, whether it's feed, all the different uses and where it goes along the way. Next slide. So just to wrap up, before I turn it back to Marcus for our next section, I just want to recap. I know 2019 was a year of change and many challenges. I think as an organization, as a farming community, I've seen everyone rise to the occasion and with a success mindset. And we're going to bring that as we go forward with some of the challenges that we may face down the road. If I were to say, what characterizes this organization, makes it exciting, we're a dynamic and flexible organization, proactive. Let's get out in front of some of these issues before they affect you as farmers, and persistent. You've seen the organization does not give up on their priorities. And so what a perfect example of that is the whole neonic thing. We saw that through to completion. It would have been easy to give up and walk away from that and get frustrated, but the organization is persistent. Your board, your staff, your members, you tell us what you need, and we go to work and get it done. And so it's pretty exciting to be part of this organization, and I'll end it there and turn it back over to Marcus. So thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing many of you in person whenever that may be.